Super Kicking It with Kelsi presents Two-Faced Wrestling Talk with Kelsi and Paul. Brought to you by PWPNation.com, the reliable wrestling website for news and opinions. Now, here's your host, Kelsi.
Hi, and welcome to Two-Faced Wrestling Talk. My co-host Paul is actually on location for a work shoot right now in Kentucky, but don't worry, we'll still be giving you the same great wrestling coverage this week on our episode. We have lots to come, including a really good interview with Dave Meltzer, and our extended discussion. We talk all about Dave Meltzer, who's actually a very controversial figure in the wrestling world amongst wrestling fans, and it's kind of crazy, as we discuss later. And please be sure to follow us on social media as well. That's on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at the same handle, at Two-Faced Pod, TWOFACED-POD. We want to interact with you. We want to hear from you. Also, please be sure to follow us on whatever medium you use to listen to this podcast. Leave us a review, a rating. That would really mean a lot to us, and it would help us spread the show to others, which we'd so appreciate. And now let's hear from Paul. Paul, it's been a great weekend of wrestling. Tell us what you thought of the happenings on Raw this week.
Well, obviously, Raw and SmackDown, the Superstar Shakeup is all the news in the wrestling world. Kind of a light week beyond that. We did have a Ring of Honor show, which we're going to get to in a little bit, and a little bit of New Japan. But much of the wrestling world is talking about the Superstar Shakeup, and it's a time where Raw and SmackDown both kind of mix things up a little bit. And I think the best part about the Superstar Shakeup is it gives the opportunity for some fresh matches. We always talk about it on the show, Kelsi, how often, the WWE just keeps rehashing the same matches. So I like the Superstar Shakeup once a year. It's kind of almost like the WWE hitting the reset button.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, Paul, and there was some really surprising things and some things that we definitely knew were going to happen, like Miz heading over to SmackDown. That was kind of pretty much highly anticipated. I'm glad it actually happened. Him and Daniel Bryan on the same brand. I think that was the right move. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we knew one way or the other. Either Miz was going to go to SmackDown or Daniel Bryan was going to go to Raw. But obviously, this is the feud that they, as you mentioned on the podcast a few weeks ago, that they laid the groundwork for long before they ever thought Daniel Bryan was going to come back. I think maybe they were hopeful he would, but they've got kind of a lot of equity built in a feud already, so I think it's going to be a great move. I thought a couple other interesting moves from the Superstar Shakeup. I think to me the biggest one out of all of them was Samoa Joe going over to SmackDown. I really hope this leads to maybe a title run for him with some new competition, getting away from guys he's already gone against.
Yeah, Joe is somebody I'd love to see with a title, and I think this will give him a chance to be in the upper card finally. So that's a good move. I agree with you there. And let me just say something I really liked I saw from Miz on Twitter. He kind of did a spoof of The Sound of Silence, the song. He said, "Hello, SmackDown, my old friend. I've come to make you must-see again. I have a vision of me winning. Since I left, the fans have been sleeping, because a vision that was planted in my healthy brain still remains. Miz ends the sound of silence." I thought that was really clever. He said hashtag SD Live, and that's kind of cool way to kick off him joining the new brand. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it was interesting the way they did it at the beginning of the show, Kelsi, with Miz being out there with the Miztourage, and they bring out KO and Sami Zayn. And you're like, how are they on the show? They didn't earn a spot. They've been fired, all this stuff. And then they read this letter from Stephanie McMahon, basically to stick it to Kurt Angle is the theory or the storyline with that. But then they turn around and announce Miz is going to SmackDown. I thought it was all good. I obviously, we both like Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, so a fresh start for them, kind of getting them away from the Shane McMahon rivalry, I think is a good idea, don't you?
I do think it's a good idea because I was kind of sick and tired of seeing that. I think we've seen the culmination at WrestleMania in a way. Let's move on to some other things. And I think another thing, speaking of other things, that is kind of newsworthy is Jeff Hardy winning the U.S. title.
Yeah, that was interesting. You talked about it last week on the podcast with Matt Hardy seemingly going to pair up with Bray Wyatt, and we learned on Raw that they're actually going to go against Cesaro and Sheamus for the vacated Raw tag team titles. But with those guys being together, you wondered, does this mean Jeff Hardy's getting a push as a single star? Well, you got your answer pretty quick. But is it too quick to just give him a title?
I don't think it's too quick to give him a title. I more think about, like you alluded to, and as I mentioned last week, Matt Hardy. And he could be a single star. So I think that Matt continually kind of gets the short end of the stick. Are we eventually going to see a woken Matt as champion? I hope so. I hope they're not giving up already. I hope he's not destined for the mid-card, but it kind of looks that way right now. I don't know. I do like what he's doing with Bray in terms of it helping Bray and his character and what he's doing, because he was really stale. I think this is something really fresh for him and good for his character, but otherwise, I don't know. I'm happy for Jeff, but at the same time, it's always Jeff getting that push, and Matt's kind of left in the dust sometimes.
Jeff Hardy, of course, took the belt from Jinder Mahal, and I thought it was something I didn't really think about, but it was a good point right at the beginning of the Raw, because Jinder Mahal went back to Raw after a year on SmackDown, and boy, he was a guy that's a perfect example of how the shakeup can kind of rejuvenate a career. He went to SmackDown a year ago. He ends up winning the world title. At one point, he wins the U.S. title. So we'll see if the shakeup has that kind of effect on some guys. A couple other noteworthy guys. Baron Corbin's going to Raw. Big Cass is now on SmackDown. We mentioned Jeff Hardy. The Riot Squad is now on Raw. They made themselves known in the Bayley Boss match, which we're going to discuss in Q&A a little later. So overall, I thought the shakeup was pretty good. As I was watching Raw, I was thinking, man, Raw is like really stacked, and it made me start to wonder whether SmackDown truly is becoming the B show again. But then for some reason, it just felt different when Samoa Joe came out there, that it's still at least close to being on level. But I don't think there's any doubt Raw is still the A show. That's where a lot of the big names are. But I think both women's divisions look interesting now, especially with all the promotions from NXT. And so I think overall, I think between the promotions and the shows after WrestleMania and the shakeup, at least for the time being, should present some good potential for some storylines.
I don't necessarily agree that SmackDown looks like the B show right now. I mean, Asuka is a huge acquisition. Daniel Bryan still being there, and The Miz moving there. You know, The Miz always claims that he makes whatever brand he's on must-see TV, but it's almost true. The Miz has carried, before he lost the title, he made it relevant again. So, I don't know. I kind of like some of the superstars, and as you said, Samoa Joe is a huge addition as well. So, I like SmackDown. I like the way it's looking. It almost looked more interesting than Raw to me.
Yep. Well, that's makes for an interesting discussion. I do like the tight nature of SmackDown. It does feel like, again, that's a whole other discussion, that Raw is too long. The 2 hours of SmackDown is really the perfect length. But when I said Raw seems loaded, it needs to be loaded because they've got an extra hour to fill. And maybe with all the talent now on Raw, we'll see less talking and more action. But that will play out in the days and weeks to come. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about New Japan. It kind of feels, even though there are shows going on, we kind of feel like I don't even want to say a lull so much, but kind of in between big stuff, but setting up big stuff. And I thought one of the big things when we watched a little bit of the shows is Suzuki and Naito. That feud is really ramping up.
We are behind a little bit. We've watched, one or two Road to Dantanku shows, but there's a lot more shows coming up in quick succession, so gonna have a lot to watch very soon with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And Suzuki and Naito really is quite compelling because Suzuki, I think meeting him, I like him even more. I didn't even know if that was possible, but it's just, he plays his role so well. Knowing how nice he is in person, how evil he seems and it comes off, truthfully, it's incredible because it seems real. And we know that from firsthand experience, he's really not mean like that. So it's pretty crazy to see him act that way. It just seems so natural. And I think that kind of adds to our enjoyment of this feud with Naito. They had a backstage encounter after the April 14th show where they were basically brawling outside the ring in the bowels of the arena. And I don't know, I just like everything that they're doing. It's really going to be a great match when they finally have that singles match.
There is one thing about Suzuki you mentioned this week you're a little worried about. You saw some hints of them working in the studio, and you're afraid that they may alter his song.
Yeah, on his Instagram, he had a lot of posts with the woman who sung, his song right now, Kaza ni Nere. And then they posted a picture of a new CD and said mission complete, and it said Suzuki Gun Ichiban. And I'm like, oh my god, does this mean that they're replacing his song? And then some people commented on Twitter, because I had tweeted out that I was worried. They said, oh, I think it is going to replace his song. I think they're going to replace it with something that has extra sadness. People had different takes on it. I don't know if that person who said the thing about sadness translated the Japanese on the CD, but either way, I don't care if it's the same song altered. I don't want it to change in any way. I love that song. It's my ringtone to wake up to, so no!
One other note from New Japan is a growing trend that this one of the funniest things in wrestling right now. Killer Elite Squad. So Lance Archer, as you well know, loves to spray water in people's faces as he's going through the crowd. But now he's taken to terrorizing children. And you might think, as you're listening to us, oh my gosh, that's awful. How can that be good? But I think the best part, in addition to Lance Archer doing it, and we're going to show a couple pictures on the YouTube version of this, is that the parents are taking glee in their children's dismay. It's very funny. They're laughing. The kids are screaming bloody murder. It's really one of the funniest things going on.
Yeah, I love it. The kids truly look mortified. It's really great. It's cute at the same time, but I do feel a little bad for the kids, but I love how New Japan is embracing it by using it in the compilation of the beginning of their show, like their montage, building up the show. That's kind of cool. I love Lance Archer. I think that's a really awesome thing to terrorize the audience. And yeah, I can't wait to see these New Japan shows coming up soon.
Yep, we got a lot to watch, and of course, Ring of Honor keeps pushing forward, and they had another show this weekend. Couple interesting matches, a couple interesting premises. Let's start with the First Blood match between Cody and Taven. I thought it was an interesting premise, and probably ended the way, or in a way that you wouldn't really expect a First Blood match to end.
Yeah, it was odd because at first it was confusing. There was confusion in the ring. They thought that Matt Taven had blood on his forehead, but really it was Cody Rhodes who was bleeding from his knuckles. I thought that was a clever way to kind of deceive the audience. You didn't know who actually won it first, and then they revealed it was Taven. So that was well done. I loved Brandy chasing Vinny around with an axe. That was really funny. But overall, I did think that there was some awkward spots in that match. The premise is unique. I've seen it done before, but I always worry, like, don't they kind of worry that what happens if they accidentally get busted open? That would be quite unfortunate for the match. Basically, it would ruin the whole thing.
Yep. We both talked about that could always put a monkey wrench into the plans if somebody accidentally gets busted open and it's not the guy that they had planned on winning. The other big match from that show was the Defy or Deny, which neither of us really understood that premise. It took them explaining it a couple of times, but in the end, Marty Scurll's going to get another title shot. Well-deserved, I would say, and he's going to get another crack at Dalton Castle. Dalton Castle, we'll be talking a little bit about him in our Q&A segment as one of our listeners asked a question about him, but Marty Scurll getting another chance at the title, I know you like that.
I do, and, a lot of people were giving them a hard time about their main event match at Supercard of Honor. I loved it, and I thought that it said a lot about them as performers to follow that Kenny Cody match, and still eventually they got the audience into it, which was difficult because, the audience was tired. They were already really, really into Kenny Cody, but finally Dalton and Marty did it. They got them into it, and I think that says a lot about them. So I'm really looking forward to Scurll getting this rematch, and I think he's going to win. I think this is kind of like, I don't see him losing this second time. So I don't know. I could be wrong, and I don't usually like to speculate, but this time I'm speculating that Skrull's going to win.
The one other takeaway is, you interviewed Flip Gordon. We ran that last week. Flip is definitely getting a push, and as I watched the show the other night with all his daredevil acrobatics and now having a main platform to show it, could he be like a Will Ospreay or a Ricochet?
Yeah, I think he always was kind of a Will Ospreay, Ricochet type of wrestler, meaning a high flyer or risk taker. But I feel like his personality's coming out a little bit more now that he's got like storylines in place, trying to go all in, trying to befriend everybody in the Bullet Club. I feel like that's adding to him. He needed something more than just his moves. Because, you could say what you want about Ospreay. Ospreay has a lot of multifaceted elements to him that make him a great wrestler. Probably like the best wrestler in the world, or just second to Okada and Omega, because Ospreay has such an emotion in his face, and Flip was kind of lacking that type of stuff, and the amazing selling that Ospreay does. Flip didn't really have that, but now this is giving him another layer, and I like that. But yeah, I do see him being like kind of on the road to be like those same guys.
Well, Flip is getting bigger, Ring of Honor is getting bigger, and the voice of Ring of Honor is starting to get more and more recognizable. That's Ian Riccaboni, one of our favorites. He really is knowledgeable about the business, but like Kelsi, is a kindred spirit in 90s trivia knowledge and references, and Kelsi always picks them up during Ring of Honor shows when Ian Riccaboni drops them in. Well, a week ago at Ring of Honor's Super Card of Honor, Kelsi got a chance to catch up with Ian Riccaboni. Check out this 90s themed interview, and if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you check out the graphics. Kind of look very Nickelodeon-like.
Hi, it's Kelsi from Super Kickin' It with Kelsi, and I'm joined by one of my favorite wrestling commentators, Ian Riccaboni. Hi, Ian. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Kelsi. It's a pleasure, and thank you so much. I mean, that means a lot to me.
Well, something we have in common, our love for the 90s. You throw in these really obscure, awesome 90s references. Tell me a little bit about why you do that and why you have this awesome love for the 90s.
Oh, my goodness. Growing up, I was always a big Nickelodeon fan, and I was at that perfect age where Doug, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, all of that was kind of getting popular. So I think my favorite one online's been Banging on a Trash Can, which is a line from Think Big, from Doug, and first time I threw it out was at Death Before Dishonor, and I didn't think anybody was going to get it. I just thought, like, oh, he's got a trash can, and it came in my head. You have these, like, weird memories stored, so I just started pulling from that. And over time, I've incorporated, Colt and I have a mutual love for Tupac, so we'll reference Tupac a lot. We've referenced all kinds of 90s rap stuff. We've referenced Next. We referenced Too Close. We referenced, like, it's just something where Colt and I, as a team, have started to gel because we've started to have a lot of fun, and we have a lot of the same mutual interests. So I think Colt and I being a product of the same time frame, the same time period, has been really nice because that's helped us form a rapport, and we both kind of refer to that 90s memory bank, so to speak, quite a bit.
Well, I love when I can catch one of your references. I definitely caught the Doug one, but you also recently in the Ring of Honor 16th anniversary pay-per-view referenced Pee-wee's Playhouse, also Wild and Crazy Kids. Those are some obscure ones, but I caught them. Tell me about that. Even maybe tell me the lines.
Yeah, so when Nick does his kind of whirly bird kick, he kind of runs the ropes a little bit. Matt yells out, "Do something crazy!" So they're wearing the colors, they're wearing the neon, the day glow. So in my head, I think back to watching Donnie Jeffcoat, to watching Omar Gooding, and I always forget Annette and Jessica, so I feel bad. I always bring out Donnie and Omar first, but you got to give love to Jessica and Annette. So that's just kind of what came to mind for Wild and Crazy Kids, and it's something that I didn't think anybody would get either, but it seems that people seem to enjoy it. And man, there was a couple others too. I mean, I'm surprised I haven't referenced Legends of the Hidden Temple yet, or Get the Picture, which was one of my favorites. That is kind of not as known anymore, unfortunately. But it's weird. I met Marc Summers, and it was one of the greatest moments of my life. And as I was trying to break into wrestling, Marc was so kind to me, and he gave me different tips, and we did a segment together for a Phillies TV show of all things. So I have an affinity for Marc Summers that is long and deep, beyond my childhood memories. They say never to meet your heroes, and he was someone to me that just surpassed and superseded everything. He was amazing. He did everything that we wanted to do, silly questions and all. So I think that helped reinforce those types of references. I don't know, maybe tonight at Supercard of Honor I might yell out things are getting super sloppy. I might call for Harvey. I don't know. Maybe I'll confuse Bobby Cruz for Harvey. We'll see. But yeah, it's just been kind of incredible. And I'm really surprised that people notice it. It's not something that we do to get a chuckle out of ourselves. It's something that I do in kind of reference and deference to Sports Center anchors that I really admired. So Keith Olbermann, Craig Kilborn, Dan Patrick, they used to incorporate these references for television, movies, and music, and that's what I was watching when I was a kid, so they would reference movies from the 60s and 70s and TV shows. So I thought, man, it sounds cool, it sounds hip. And so for me as a broadcaster, they've inspired me to do that and kind of put a different twist on it.
Nice, and I mean, I can't wait to catch some when I rewatch Supercard of Honor, some of those gems that you'll hide in there. But as you alluded to, some people might not know, you have actually worn quite a bit of hats. You do a lot of different things. Tell us about your other work that you've done.
Oh, I mean, it's a long and it's been a long road to get here to Ring of Honor. I wrote a best-selling book about the Philadelphia Phillies, the 100 greatest Phillies of all time. So that was kind of wild. I work in pharmaceuticals. I teach at Holy Family University, where I get to teach what I've learned from Ring of Honor there and incorporate to prospective sports management and sports media students, which is awesome. It's super fulfilling. I volunteer with the township. I do, and I really. The most important thing for me is with this mild modicum of celebrity to be able to be asked to do things like read across America in our local schools in Allentown, and to visit children's hospitals when we go on the road, and to be a part of ways to give back. And so in addition to a lot of the jobs that I have and continue to have, that's super cool to me that people ask us to do these things, and sometimes we offer to do them if we've been with them before. And it's really nice because these communities, especially like New Orleans, give us so much when they host our events that we're able to give even just a little bit back by visiting some of the kids at the Children's Hospital or speaking to some of the classes, or even in our hometowns when we're able to do that as well.
That's so admirable, and it's great that you guys get to do that. But one of the reasons why you're able to do things like that is because Ring of Honor as a company is getting bigger and bigger. Tell me about how Ring of Honor is growing, and it seems like we're breaking records left and right with attendance. And why do you think that is? What do you attribute that to?
I think it's the athletes, and I think it's creative freedom. I think everybody's really okay living in their own skin and being themselves and giving the fans their best selves every time. We have guys that think in a real 360 worldview, especially that's necessary in a world with Twitter, Instagram, where you, as anybody that's notable, you have to be on and foster those ideas and personas. So when guys like the Young Bucks, like Cody, like Marty Skrull, Adam Page, when they're doing Being the Elite and it's getting 200,000 views, and that's a fraction of what we get on television, but not a small fraction. I mean, this is a sizable audience they're cultivating that they're bringing to our television is bringing to them, and then we have these great events like we're going to see here tonight at Supercard of Honor, breaking records. Almost 6,000 people. Last year we had 3,600. I got chills when they roared. This year it's almost twice as many. And I'm a little nervous, but this continued growth is awesome. We have such dedicated athletes and wrestlers. Our production staff is amazing. We keep getting more and more new bells and whistles, and they've been incorporating them into our events and pay-per-views. We just got Honor Club, which is amazing. Everybody can watch all of our live events now through Honor Club, which is an incredible advancement for us. It brings these great events that we were doing and putting on DVD live to fans, which Supercard of Honor will be broadcast through tonight. So just amazing, and I think it comes down to the people. To get back to your original question, I kind of digressed a little bit. It comes down to the people, the athletes, and the production. Just everybody being comfortable living in their own skin, being themselves, and knowing there's one mission, and that one mission is to get Ring of Honor to continue to grow.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. I think you're a big part of why Ring of Honor is becoming more successful, you and all the other great talent, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelsi.
Take care. Well, I'm truly grateful to have had this interview with Ian Riccaboni. I really thank him for his time. He was truly a pleasure to interview, and I'm quite flattered because he tweeted out that he said, literally, it was his favorite interview he'd ever done. He said, the exact words, literally, "This is my favorite interview I've ever done." And that really made me feel very great and special. And so thank you, Ian. I really appreciate your time. And as Caprice Coleman said, I love me some Ian Riccaboni. Caprice said that during this last show we watched. And, they also had some really good references in that show. In fact, it was Caprice Coleman who mentioned Captain Planet, and Ian Riccaboni, of course, said, which person is wind, which person is earth, and which person is fire. So more 90s references in the last show alone. And be sure to keep up with Two-Faced Wrestling Talk, because actually we have an interview with Caprice Coleman, and it was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done besides the Ian one, and actually he pretty much put me on the spot. It was like I was on Coleman's pulpit. And when we come back, we'll have our pre-recorded discussion and interview with Dave Meltzer. Our awesome Two-Faced logo was created by artist Eric Hodson. Check him out on Facebook at Eric Hodson Illustration. Hodson is spelled Hodson. He also has a Patreon where you can directly support his wrestling artwork, which is based off of comic book covers. His Patreon is patreon.com/HeyMelby, HeyMelby. Also, go to webtoons.com and subscribe to his new comic, The Dreaded Dinosaur Man. His art can also be purchased on Store Envy. Thanks, Eric. We love your logo.
Tricky, come on. You know Mr. Brightside is the best Killer song.
No, it's not, dude. No, it's... Oh, crap. Dude, we're live. We're live.
What?
We're live. Hey, it's Tricky and Stoutsy from the Offended Podcast, produced by PWP Nation.
We're basically the Seinfeld of podcasts.
And just because we are produced by a professional wrestling site doesn't mean we are a professional wrestling show. Recorded in the glorious Cockpit Studios, we are actually a show about anything, and sometimes just friends drinking and discussing life, pop culture, and sports, but with no filter.
Anything goes on Offended. You can find us on Apple Podcasts under the PWP Nation Network, along with other great PWP Nation produced shows.
And if you like our show, head on over to prowrestlingtees.com/offended-podcast to buy our shirt. Support us, eh?
You can follow Offended on Instagram at OffendedPod, and us on Twitter. You can follow Tricky at Trick1042, and myself, Stoutsy, at J_Stout09.
And thank you for listening. By the way, Jim, all these things I've done is Best Killer song.
Erroneous! On all accounts.
Welcome back to Two-Faced Wrestling Talk. Thanks for joining us, and it's time for our Heads and Tails segment. A little different this week, as Kelsi got with the legendary wrestling writer Dave Meltzer. Had a chance to talk to him during WrestleMania week. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about all things wrestling, as he was very gracious with his time with Kelsi.
Hi, it's Kelsi from Super Kickin' It with Kelsi, and I'm joined by the one and only Dave Meltzer. He is one of the greatest wrestling journalists ever, and really you kind of brought wrestling journalism into prominence, and I think if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have so many people with wrestling podcasts talking about wrestling, writing about wrestling. What advice do you have to people who want to do this as a career?
I would say, for one thing, study wrestling really, really hard. Watch as much wrestling and read a lot. Read a lot of good writers. Writers, not necessarily wrestling writers, but sports writers and even news writers. And also go to a really good journalism school, because that helped me immensely. So yeah, those would be. But just study, work real hard, be very, very persistent. For me, it took years and years and years to get to a certain level. And a lot of sacrifices, yeah, you got to be really persistent. If you really push, and you really want it bad enough, you can get it.
Great advice. And as you alluded to before, you said that wrestling right now is kind of really big and bigger than it's been in a long time. Yeah. And I think there's a number of factors that play into that. But what do you think are the reasons that wrestling is at a higher level right now, especially non-WWE wrestling?
I think that just the nature of the media, the social media, and guys learning to market themselves as their brand as opposed to letting some promoter market them. Guys being very aggressive at that, and a lot of guys have learned how to make themselves stars. And when you are stars and you are appearing on independent shows, you're going to sell extra tickets and you're going to be in demand. And that led to more popular independent shows and more independent shows, which means more work for different people. So it's kind of like that all, that all kind of like built on each other, and also I think people learn to appreciate wrestling and high quality wrestling as opposed to television stars. The majority still want to see television stars, but there's a huge fan base now that just wants to go and see really great wrestling, and they will accept the idea that even if they're not television stars, that they're great wrestlers and they will pay to see them. So that's all. I think it's all kind of like work together.
I agree with you, and as you said, it's kind of a different day and age with technology and the death of kayfabe and everything. But how do you think you have more heat than some heel wrestlers with your star ratings? It's kind of weird. No one would ever think, I think 10, 15 years ago, that a wrestling journalist would get more heat than some heels in wrestling.
I never really think about it because I can't. I don't have time to think about it, but it's weird. It's definitely weird. And the star rating thing, I mean, it's like, that's like, of all the things I do, it's the least important. So I don't know. But it's like there's people who go like, man, mate, why don't you just not do them? But it's like, no, that's like almost being bullied out of what you do. So I'm not going to not do it. But it's like, but if you're, when you do something like that, any critic is going to be criticized for star ratings because no two people think alike. So that doesn't bother me, and that's fine. But I don't know. Some of it, it can be kind of weird too.
I agree. I, for one, just love to hear what you have to say. Even if I don't agree all the time, it's still all just subjective. Yeah. And you've got so much experience. I think it's fun to read what you have to say. Oh, thanks. And also, I just picked up Liam O'Rourke's book. Yeah, Crazy Like a Fox, and I can't wait to finish reading it.
It's an awesome book.
Yeah, he has attributed a lot of, the success of the book to you. He said that, really? Your interview for the book was a big part of, making it seem legitimate and giving it that next level. And what do you think about the book?
Okay, so I want to say this for him. I have never seen someone so persistent because, just because of my schedule and everything. He asked me at first, can you do an interview? And I go, I'm going to make time. I'm going to do it. Yeah. And I kept putting him off and putting him off and putting him off. I mean, it feels like it was like a year of him every week. And I go like, if I'm free on Thursday, this happened. Finally, it came right down to the wire. And I go, look, I promised you. And we talked for a couple hours. And I'm glad we did because he did such an incredible job with the book. It's my favorite non-autobiography as far as a biography from somebody, let alone going back 30 years who wasn't even around for all this, to be able to put everything in its perspective. And he really, I'm reading it going he got the perspective. He got who Brian Pillman was. He got what Stampede Wrestling was, what WCW was, the politics behind it, the WWE, everything. He did a fantastic job, and a lot of it was, again, talking to his family members. And I think that helped a lot. But he really, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't even know, and I was pretty good friends with Brian, because Brian was a guy Brian never bragged about his accomplishments to me ever. I knew some of them because I knew he played in the NFL, and I knew he was a college football All-American. But, and I knew he was a good hockey player, even though he pretty much may have never told me anything other than he played youth hockey. But, and I knew his overcoming the cancer and everything like that as a child. I knew that too, which he also never told me, but other people had. So, but yeah, the whole thing, it really brought me back reading that book. He was an incredible guy, and I wish he was still around, because I always think that he would have put such a funny perspective on everything, because he would call up and he would just he was hilarious. He was just a hilarious, brilliant guy, and he understood wrestling. He figured wrestling out at a level that most people don't.
Yeah, he's such an interesting subject matter, and I also wish that he was around today. Who would you like to see him face if he was around today? It's
not so much face, it's just his reactions to everything that's changed. I think that he would be aghast at some of the risks that these guys take, because I know, he went to, when he first saw Rey Mysterio, he was just how close Rey Mysterio would come on some of these moves to hitting his head on concrete and things like that. But Rey was so good he never did. But I remember we went to Rey Mysterio and don't take so many risks, because he would be afraid of the risk taking of the guys now. I mean, he flew a lot, but if you ever watch how much he flew, it was safe flight, you know. But I think that he would just be, you know, I think that he would be a super heel today because he'd figure out how to be a super heel like Cody Rhodes and even honestly even better.
I could see that for sure. And also, we just went to our first PWG show at the Globe Theater. Unfortunately, it wasn't in Reseda to get that traditional experience, but I think
it was the same. I've been to both. I mean, it's not exactly the same as Reseda, but to me, it was still a PWG show because you got the guys. You know, you had the combination of the great workers in the main event, and you had the guys underneath that are trying to make a name, that are just killing themselves to make a name. So that is what PWG is.
Definitely. And what's your favorite PWG moment you've ever, been a part of live?
Oh, man. My favorite PWG moment would be the last 5 minutes of the Young Bucks and Adam Cole against Will Ospreay, Ricochet, and Matt Sydal match. I think, for 5 minutes, it was just like, oh, my God. I mean, I still think that that's probably the best tag team match I've seen in years and years and years, just for spectacularness. I know some people will have other matches or that they think, but you had 6 incredibly talented guys who decided, that day, they pretty much wrote on social media, beforehand that we're gonna do something special, and they did. That would be my favorite. That would be my favorite overall, sure.
That's one of my favorites as well. And final question, thanks for your time, but what has your job as a wrestling journalist, what's your favorite thing that you've been able to be a part of because of what you do?
There's a million things. I think with hindsight, wow. Because again, like the Flair Steamboat stuff has kind of, in some circles, has really become like classic stuff, and being able to be there for that stuff. I think that when Misawa passed away, it really hit me that I was there for the Misawa-Saruta match, where Misawa beat him the first time at Tokyo Dome just by fluke, and the emotion in that building. From that from a historical standpoint, would be one of the things. But just I've got to see a lot of cool stuff over the years, and a lot of changes in the business that, for the most part, have been for the better. Not all, but for the most part. I'm certainly a lot more worried about the talent now than I've ever been. I mean, because these guys work so hard, but I'm scared for them too.
Yeah, they take some scary risks, but I appreciate your time, and it's really been a 5-star interview with you. You're a 5-star interviewee. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you very much. Okay, I appreciate it.
Thanks. I can't tell you how much this interview meant to me. It was the first interview that we got of the weekend during WrestleMania week, and he was so nice. And having said that, it's crazy, as I alluded to in one of my questions, how much heat and hate he actually gets for his opinions. And yes, they're opinions, guys. People have them, and they're allowed to have them. And I don't always agree with his, but I enjoy hearing what he has to say and reading what he has to say, because he's somebody who's followed wrestling forever. And if it wasn't for him, maybe we wouldn't even have wrestling journalism. Maybe we wouldn't have a podcast right now. Maybe people wouldn't be writing about it to such a high extent and a large extent. To me, cut Meltzer some slack. I know he's not always right with his reporting. That's not what I always go to him for anyway. And having said that, sometimes things change on a dime in the wrestling industry, especially in WWE, where you've got Vince at the helm kind of doing whatever he wants. Sources and things you find out, as Meltzer even knows, should be taken with a grain of salt. Even if he reports on them, there's a chance that it's going to be wrong. Everyone knows that. It is what it is. What do you think about Meltzer?
Well, look, Dave Meltzer has forgotten more about wrestling than most people know about wrestling. That's how long he's been covering the business. He has seen it all. He was rattling off some legendary New Japan names that, granted, admittedly, I'm relatively new to New Japan wrestling, but I'm like, man, he's like an encyclopedia, if people remember what an encyclopedia is.
Yeah.
He's just so knowledgeable, and you're right, it's his opinion, and I get people are going to disagree, but then it goes to a whole another level with him of personal attacks. I mean, the guy knows the business. So for anybody to question his knowledge of the business because they don't agree with his opinion is kind of ridiculous. And look, do I think maybe he favors New Japan and Ring of Honor matches? Yeah, probably. But guess what? 8 times out of 10, those matches are the better matches.
They are, because just how the companies are.
Mm-hmm.
WWE has a certain style you're not going to get as an intense of an in-ring product. That's just the way it is. So Meltzer in the past has gotten heat for not giving a WWE match a higher star rating. And one time he used the excuse, well, you know, I've seen matches far beyond that level, you know, a few weekends ago at PWG. And he's right, you know, you go to a PWG show and it's like nothing else ever. The performances, they are incredible. The wrestlers go all out, and the environment is really, really close-knit. It's really intimate, and that adds to the experience. So adding all that up together, I think, yeah, most of the time it's going to beat a WWE typical match. And even the better WWE matches, a lot of times on the independents, there's matches just as good, if not better, going on at the same time. So I could see his point, and, you know, you might say that I'm a little biased too, but I like all wrestling. I like WWE when it's good, but the whole thing is, it's just a different style. It's hard to even compare. He likes New Japan, I like New Japan. He likes other Japanese wrestling that I don't even watch. He is so knowledgeable, as we said earlier. How can one man find time to watch all this wrestling? I can hardly do it.
Well, you say, how does he have time? It was interesting in his Q&A session live podcast that he did in New Orleans. He was asked about how he used to watch the New Japan shows before there were streaming services, and he would get the things sent to him, and he would get them sometimes a week later and go back and watch them. So he has always invested the time into watching, whether it was New Japan, WWE, independent promotions. Again, the guy knows wrestling, has seen so much wrestling. He knows what's good, and he knows, you know, we know what's good and bad to an extent, but he has seen it all.
He has, and like at that Q&A, I was so impressed. He was just rattling off names, rattling off matches like they happened yesterday. Matches like they're 20 years old plus. It was crazy. I was so impressed. Also, just I loved the Q&A. I thought it was very well done. Even the questions were very knowledgeable. The people in the audience were respectful. Brian Alvarez, who I also love, was there. He was great. I just thought it was well worth the money for me. I was glad I went. It was a unique experience, something that you don't usually think of as a WrestleMania weekend event, but it was well worth it.
It was funny, too, because he's so knowledgeable that, you know, he really wasn't even tripped up by any question. He had a knowledgeable answer to I think, just about every question. So it was kind of impressive.
The only thing he didn't have an answer to was when people asked him stuff like, what was your favorite thing of this? Or, you know, what was the best thing you've seen of that? Even in my interview, it was hard for him to pinpoint because he's seen so much. Again, this harkens back to why trash all over him for his opinion when the facts are that he has invested the time to watching all this stuff. He's dedicated his life to doing this, and he's kind of progressed the whole wrestling, writing and reporting and talking about wrestling business and industry. Like I said, I don't know if we'd have a podcast right now if it wasn't for him.
And look, if it's like anything else, if you don't like what he's writing, you don't have to read it.
Exactly.
you know, and it's okay to disagree with him, but the personal attacks are what are frustrating to see because he is knowledgeable. It is his opinion. So, you know, like you said, you know, sometimes things he reports don't come to fruition. That doesn't mean he didn't have sources and he's just making things up, you know?
Right. Some people, you know, argue that that's the case, but that's ridiculous. I don't think that's the case at all. And after having met him, I do think it's ridiculous, the attacks, because he was such a nice guy. I wasn't expecting him to be that nice. He was one of the nicest people in the business that I've ever met. And so glad to have met him and talked to him.
So we thank Dave Meltzer for taking the time to talk with Kelsi. It was an entertaining and really kind of an informative interview. And so we're glad we got a chance to meet him and talk with him. When we come back on Two-Faced Wrestling Talk, We take your questions. It's our Q&A segment. Plus, we'll send you home. St. Arnold Brewing Company, located in Houston, is Texas' oldest craft brewery. Their goal is to brew world-class beers and deliver them to their customers as fresh as possible, making them the best beers in Texas and Louisiana. Their customers are beer lovers, people that appreciate great, full-flavored beers. So whether you're enjoying an Art Car IPA or a smooth-drinking lawnmower, look for St. Arnold beers throughout Louisiana and Texas.
What? Hey, Jim, where does Wrestling Discussions live?
PWP Nation?
That's correct. PWP Nation is the #1 source for all things professional wrestling. They have great articles, podcasts, and overall great wrestling content. No dirt sheet rumors, just articles and facts.
You can follow PWP Nation on all social media platforms like Facebook at facebook.com/PWP Nation. You can also follow them on Twitter and Instagram with both using the same handles, which is at PWP Nation.
Radical. And please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to PWP Nation Network, where you will find all the great podcasts like Offended, Beer and Money, and many more. And please give us a Dave Meltzer rating. Give us that 5-star rating.
That's right. Go join the community today to get the best content for your professional wrestling needs.
PWP Nation, where wrestling discussion lives.
Welcome back to Two-Face Wrestling Talk. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for all our listeners for sending in some great questions. We've got 9 questions to go through, so let's get right to them. First one is from Thomas Ross at MRTom28, and he asks, why are the cruiserweights no longer on Raw? Well, I think, I'm hopeful, among other things, that there is a transition in the cruiserweight division. It never really fit on Raw. They never gave it the proper time. But at the same time, the 205 Live show, as we've mentioned in previous weeks, is a mess as well. I do believe it belongs on the main show if they're going to keep filming them at a venue, but it should be on SmackDown since that's where they record 205 Live anyway. My personal preference, as I've said in weeks past, is I just wish they would move the whole division and the show back to Full Sail.
I basically agree with you 100%. I really have nothing more to add because, as we saw firsthand during WrestleMania week, the taping of 205 Live, it was just dead. And it's sad to see these cruiserweights get this type of reaction. So I feel like they should move back to Full Sail, where the crowd embraces them, loves them, and it makes us watching at home have a lot better time, experiencing these guys' matches because the crowd is into it just like we are at home. So our next question comes from Magnet and Steel at DEJKIRKBY. And he asks, who would you like to see have a run with the WWE and Universal titles before Mania 35? Well, I'd be cool if I saw, Samoa Joe have a run. I'd love that. Of course, I'm dreaming here, but I'd love to see Sami Zayn have a run. That'll never happen. That's a pipe dream, but hey, a girl can dream, right?
Yes, you can dream, and I know how you love Sammy. Maybe at least he'll get a run at the secondary title on Raw. That would be good to see because we both like Sami Zayn. Samoa Joe would have been my answer for the Universal title, but now that he's switching shows, I would like to see him get a run at the WWE title. And I'm sure he's going to get a run, but Braun Strowman, a chance at the Universal title. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the coming weeks with that Universal title and whether Roman takes it from Brock Lesnar, and if Roman holds it for a while, or if somebody else beats Roman. That's going to be an interesting battle coming forward. But I think my answer would have been for the Universal show, Samoa Joe. So now I've got to say for the WWE title, it's got to be Samoa Joe. And I especially love what Samoa Joe has done on the mic the last 2 weeks. He has been tremendous, and he's obviously a tremendous wrestler. And you think the potential of him with some matches, and he even alluded to it, AJ Styles, Shinsuke on SmackDown, just some great possibilities with Samoa Joe. Our next question is from View from the Top Rope at View from Top Rope. And what do you think would be the better match? Kenny Omega versus Macho Man Randy Savage, Kenny Omega versus Bret Hitman Hart, or Kenny Omega versus Nature Boy Ric Flair. I'm going to go with the first choice. I think him and Macho Man have a kind of similar style. I think it would be a more of an upbeat type of match. I just picture Bret Hart and Ric Flair more kind of ground and pound. So I think as far as styles go, in my opinion, the Macho Man would be the right answer there.
Oh man, you took the answer right from me. I definitely have to agree with you. I do think it should be Omega versus Macho Man, because you think back to the classic Macho Man Ricky Steamboat match, and that was meticulously planned. It was really well done. And I feel like Omega is that same type of planner, just like Macho Man was. I feel like they could pull out a really amazing match, and I'd love to see it. I wish it could have happened. So our next question comes from Diesel. And guys, Diesel is with View from the Top Rope, and we love those guys over there. Be sure to check out their podcast. So Diesel says, how do you feel Dalton Castle's ROH World title reign is going? When and who should he lose the title to? Personally, I thought he should have dropped it to Marty Scurll at Supercard of Honor. And you could find Diesel at Diesel_VFTR. So, basically, we kind of alluded to this earlier a little bit. I feel like Dalton Castle's title reign is going pretty well, actually. Better than I expected. Not that I wasn't not a fan of Dalton Castle. I always was, but I've become a bigger fan as his title reign has gone on. Like his match against Jay Lethal, I thought he really proved that he could really pull out all the stops. He could go toe-to-toe in the ring with one of the best wrestlers on the planet. And I don't know, he impressed me in that match. And then again with Marty Scurll, as I said earlier, going right after the Kenny Cody thing, I think he impressed me again there. And yeah, I did think he should have dropped it to Marty that night, but I think we are going to see that, and I think that's who it's going to be coming up next in that rematch whenever that happens.
Yeah, I have been on record that I wasn't a huge Dalton Castle fan. I wasn't happy when he got the title. I just kind of wasn't. His gimmick was interesting, but his wrestling style bored me. I think I even said it didn't really fit Ring of Honor because he's not athletic in the sense of can take some of the high spots. And so at times he didn't feel like he fit there. But you mentioned the Jay Lethal match, and that's really the one where my opinion changed on him a little bit. I was very impressed with that match. And then the match at Supercard of Honor was really good too. I am in agreement. I think Marty Scurll will get his title, and maybe the next time they get together. Our next question comes from Brotherly Love Wrestling at 215 Wrestling. Cody seems to be recruiting for his new club. If so, who would you like to see him recruit? Both men and women. And then he also mentioned Steen and Generico, which obviously doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon. So Cody wants to be the boss. So you got to think guys who are okay not being the boss, but kind of have his devious mentality, I guess is the best way to put it. I think Silas Young would be a good fit with him. Maybe even somebody like the Dogs, even though they have a goofy personality. I could see them falling under his leadership, so to say. So I guess those will be my choices.
Someone like maybe Shane Taylor, who you could hire, because he's like the guy for hire to do whatever you want. So maybe because he's willing to work for anybody, somebody like Shane Taylor. But let's go over to New Japan Pro Wrestling and think about people he could get from there. I'm thinking Switchblade, Jay White, of course. He didn't want to join the Bullet Club under Kenny's rule, but maybe if Cody's going to break off and do his own thing, maybe Switchblade will join with him to dethrone Kenny and take down, the Bullet Club of old. So I'd like to see that. That'd be kind of interesting. Maybe somebody like Michael Elgin, who's kind of a tough guy, but not necessarily squeaky clean. So I don't know. Those are all great choices, I think, yours and mine. And I don't know. That's a very interesting premise, actually. So our next question comes from our good friend Dave. Dave is on Twitter at Dave POZEFSKY, and he asks, what do you think of the Sasha Bailey feud? In my opinion, I think it's an excellent example of a slow burn storyline, unusual for WWE. I love the Mania spot, and I'm liking the surprising directions with the face-heel dynamics. Do you like it, or do you think they should move on? Well, I do like it a lot, and I'm not sick of it. I just want basically the payoff to be on a big stage. I don't care how long it's drawn out, and I don't care about the dynamics per se. I do like that they're kind of doing it differently, but I just want it to be on like a noteworthy pay-per-view. I don't want the payoff to just be on a Raw or just on a normal show or a throwaway pay-per-view. I want it to be like, if I was doing any pay-per-view ever, of course WrestleMania. But if not, maybe SummerSlam? I don't know. I think it deserves a big show.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of a little bummed when they said that they were going to have the fight on Raw this week, because we both believe it is really, I think, a main event for a pay-per-view if Vince would actually allow that. But I thought the way they handled it on Raw, with them having a great fight but no conclusion, is a good way to get things going. So I was happy with that. I like the way that Bayley is kind of standing her ground and not seeming like a pushover, which I think is good for her character. I have seen enough of them fighting between NXT and now on the main roster that they both deliver when they go at it. And so I'm excited about it being on a pay-per-view, and it should be quite the battle, to say the least. I'm looking forward to it for sure. Just a couple more questions, 3 more actually. This one from Adam, at Adam J. Dyer, and he says, it's driving me mad, but what the hell was in Shane's lockbox? I'm guessing it was the deeds to WCW. Any ideas? Will they revisit this area? Well, I have to be honest, I kind of actually forgot about that mention of the lockbox. It would have been something stupid probably by WWE, like that he has proof that he's not Vince's kid or Stephanie isn't Vince's kid, which would be a really hard storyline to produce since both of them clearly look like they are Vince's kids. So I could see them doing something dumb like that, even though that's not what they did.
Yeah, I could see them going the dumb route. Like, just think back to something like the gobbledygooker. The gobbledygooker. That thing was ridiculous, and they built it up like it was the best thing ever. So WWE kind of has a problem with like payoffs sometimes. They go the silly route, or sometimes there's no payoff at all. Like we saw with the Bella Twins, where one of them had to be the other one's servant. They weren't getting along, and then all of a sudden they were fine. They totally dropped that storyline. Never mind, we're never going back to it. WWE does this quite frequently, and it's something that really annoys me. So, of course they won't ever revisit it. They drop stuff all the time. It's kind of in their history. Our next question comes from our good friend Aaron, and he's with pwpnation.com. You guys, please check out PWP Nation. They've got great wrestling coverage as we advertise in the middle of our show. Please check them out. I write articles for them, including one about Dave Meltzer, who is our extended discussion topic this week. So Aaron says, what's one thing you would change about New Japan Pro Wrestling? And Aaron is at Aaron_PWP. Well, I love New Japan Pro Wrestling. They do so much stuff right. One thing that's kind of silly, and it's not really important, it's just a nitpicky thing, a shorter intermission. When you've got a 5-hour show, and I'm staying up in the middle of the night sometimes to watch these shows, a 10-minute, 15-minute intermission, that's kind of long for me in a longer show. So just like a 5-minute intermission would be better. They don't always have them, but a lot of times they do, and it kind of is like, oh, just come on, I want the next match, especially because usually the intermission separates like the undercard matches from the like main event bigger matches. So by that time I'm like ready for the bigger matches, and I've been waiting all night. So yeah, it's something small, but there's not much for me to complain about New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Well, I like that about the intermission, because I'm not a big fan of the intermissions regardless. But the one thing I have is also fairly minor, because if you want to be a fan of New Japan, you can find it. But I think if they're going to expose themselves to what we like to refer to as the WWE homers who think that there's nothing beyond WWE, they aren't going to go seek it out. I think New Japan needs to get on some sort of broadcast television in America. I know they're on Access, but not everybody has DirecTV. Somehow, if they could get an hour slot once a week on like a sports network like FS1 even, I think that would do wonders for them getting more of a foothold in the United States. So that would be the one thing I'd like to see New Japan do, is get some sort of a TV deal with some nationwide cable company or cable sports network or a cable entertainment network that could give them a little more exposure. And I think they would be great for their brand as well. Final question is from PC Hasler at PCHNIBOG. He says, do you think all the women in WWE could be included into one singular division like 205 is? That way the women might also get tag titles as well as get more battle royals, more main event matches. And that's a good question. And actually, I like the premise a lot, except when you think of what they've done with the 205 division and how bad that comes across and really is buried. And I think the women are too prominent right now. I think they're too popular. And if you made them into a show that's only on the WWE network, I think that would be a huge mistake. I have said before, I think what I would like to see is one singular women's champion and create a tag team champion. Keep the ladies separated on the two different shows, but have the ability for those champions to bounce between the shows and wrestle in between. That way you create all kinds of fresh matchups, but you keep them on the main shows. I think a women all show would be great. I just think it would get buried on the WWE network, much like 205 Live is, and I don't think it would get the necessary necessary eyeballs that the women's division deserves right now.
I tend to actually agree with you on that. I mean, the idea of a women's show is compelling to me. But at the same time, I just have a feeling it won't work. Even though the women are a lot more over than the wrestlers on 205 Live, because they've got better exposure from already being on the main roster, and they've got exposure just from people knowing their characters and getting to see them every week. So I think people would tune in more so than 205 Live, but I still think it runs the risk, like you said, to getting buried on the network where people forget about it. There's just too much wrestling right now for people to keep up with another thing. So I don't know. I think that it might be a bad idea to do that. Let them, get the main event of the shows they're on now. Let them just keep doing that. Keep basically breaking ceilings. Keep moving forward. Just keep doing that, I think, for now. Well, we really had some great questions this week. I want to thank everyone who submitted a question. They were great, and we enjoyed answering them. Let us know your thoughts if you don't agree with us. Make sure you interact with us on Twitter at TwoFacedPod, TWOFACEDPOD. This is a two-way conversation, and we want to hear from you for sure. Thanks again, guys. And now it's time to close out the show and send them home. What do you have, Paul?
Well, my take is actually kind of a play on what we just had for our final question, and it involves the WWE Greatest Royal Rumble, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia next Friday. And on the surface, it seems like an amazing show, and it probably will be an amazing show with all of the content. But then you start peeling away the layers of the onion, and there's a few things I don't like about this pay-per-view. First of all, the fact that they're doing this major show 2 weeks before one of their other pay-per-views. Now, if it was still split brand, then it would make sense. But you're basically going to have both brands having pay-per-views within 2 weeks of another. So you're not really developing storylines quite as well as you could if you had a whole month. Not that WWE is always great at developing storylines anyways. Secondly, this pay-per-view, it's a Royal Rumble. Well, the Royal Rumble is already one of the biggest events on the WWE calendar, and you just had it a few months ago. So why are we having another Royal Rumble? If you're going to have this pay-per-view in Saudi Arabia, come up with some new premise, some new gimmick match that we haven't had before. That would be my second problem with it. But my biggest problem with it is the fact that we talked about the ladies having the spotlight. Well, they'll have no spotlight in Saudi Arabia because women aren't allowed to wrestle in Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to be a part of the show. And I think that really it kind of runs counter to what the WWE's whole women's revolution or evolution is all about. And so now they're not even going to be on the show. Now, some forward thinking would be, okay, if they can't be there, how about making Fastlane an all women's pay-per-view? Put both titles on the line. Maybe that's where the Bayley-Sasha Banks feud comes to a head, and that's the main event. You have some compelling tag teams. We've got enough talent now in the women's division that it could carry an entire pay-per-view. So WWE really could have generated some goodwill in their women's division if they had turned around and made Fastlane an all-women's pay-per-view if the ladies can't perform in Saudi Arabia.
Wow, Paul, that's some really interesting thoughts there, and I would love to see an all-women's pay-per-view. I don't think we'll actually see that happen, though. You know, Vince doesn't seem to be a big fan of that type of thing. But on a more positive note, I'm a fan of this wrestler, David Starr, and that's who I want to talk about in my Closing the Show segment. He's just somebody that I've been paying more attention to recently, and I want to plug him a little bit. One of my favorite things about him is his awesome intro. He says, "The cream in your coffee, your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestler, the Jewish canon, the physical embodiment of charisma, the most entertaining man in professional wrestling, the Bernie Sanders of professional wrestling, Mr. American Rana, Davey Wrestling, the 104 Minute Man, the main event. He's really good at Twitter. The King of Taunts, the product, David Starr." I just think David Starr is a really unique guy. He's really humble too. I recently watched a YouTube mini documentary on him. The director was Kenny Johnson, and you could go to his YouTube channel. It's called "I'm Really Good, ... And I just think it was a really interesting peek into David Starr, like the actual guy. He just seems really humble. You get a little glimpse of what he's really like. He likes art a lot. Like, his dad was into art, so his dad kind of pushed him to do art. Meanwhile, like, David really liked sports and stuff, so now he like kind of combines the two. He designs like his gear, and it's just really, really a cool thing. He had some really interesting matches recently. He had a match against Nick Aldis for the NWA title. You can catch that on NWA's YouTube channel. I really enjoyed that. Also, he had a match with Walter that was pretty recently, taking place in Defiant Wrestling, and we also got to see him in person at WrestleMania week, so I really enjoyed seeing him. His merch is really cool. I just ordered a shirt. You can get that at bottomlinemerch.com/David Starr. He also has a Pro Wrestling Tees shop at prowrestlingtees.com/David Starr. He has a website, theproductds.com. And if you guys aren't familiar with him, check out his stuff. He really is kind of one of my new favorites. He's been around a while, but I'm just kind of getting into him, and I suggest you guys take a peek if you haven't already. And to close out the show, I'm going to do my little spoof of an intro kind of inspired by his intro. I am the sugar in your tea, your favorite wrestler's favorite wrestling fan, the Cajun seasoning, the physical embodiment of cuteness, the most enjoyable woman in wrestling coverage, the Colt Cabana of professional wrestling fan podcasters, Miss Super Kicking It, Kelsi wrestling coverage, the 81-minute podcaster, I'm really good at Facebook, all that and s'mores. I kind of gave up near the end and just put all that in s'mores, but that'll do it for our show. Thanks so much for joining us this week on Two-Faced Wrestling Talk. We'll see you again next time. Thank you.